Now let's get to the consequences of any attack when it comes to Syria, or non-attack for that matter. And to paraphrase a line you probably know, and albeit a different context, what happens or could happen in Syria will not stay in Syria. For more on the impact on the broader region, let's bring our next guest, Danielle Pletka. Danielle is the Vice President in Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. She's kind enough to join us from our nation's capital. Danielle, thanks for a few minutes.
It's a pleasure.
Well, we now know the president's going to be addressing the nation, and we're going to get a subsequent vote in Congress, and it's almost impossible to read all the tea leaves from what's going on and the seeming one-day support from certain lawmakers and now oppositions. But let's talk about the Middle East here. And what one lawmaker said, I thought it was pretty interesting, Lamar and Alexander, was we don't know what the second, third, and fourth steps that happen after the attacks would be, and that's what really worries us. So to the general public, if it is a targeted strike, tomahawks coming from off the coast, what are the biggest concerns of unintended consequences that could happen in the days, weeks, and months that follow?
Right. Senator Alexander asked a good question, and part of the problem is that having not heard from the president all this time, there's a lot of room for speculation because it's not clear what his strategy is going to be. Look at what's on the ground in Syria. We've got the Assad regime, we've got Iranian ground troops, we've got Islamic Revolutionary Guards from Iran, we've got Hezbollah terrorists, we've got al-Qaeda, and we've got the Free Syrian Army, which we're supposedly helping. So there are a lot of guys in there who have the potential for retaliatory attacks against us. It sure would be nice to know what the president's thinking about that.
But he's been pretty clear, enough obviously to get support of Speaker Boehner, Eric Cantor, Senators McCain, other Republicans, that this would be a targeted strike. It would not be intended for regime change, no American boots on the ground, simply a response to the use of chemical weapons. If it's the targeted approach over 2 days or whatever the time period would be, there's no guarantees in war here. Is that still a response here that's worth the subsequent risks that you just described about those uncertainties on the ground?
Look, I think that it's very important that the United States respond to Syria's chemical weapons attack on its own people. Then again, I've thought that it's very important that the United States take a stronger position on Syria for the last 2 years. The problem for all of us is, are we doing this to protect and preserve the president's credibility and manhood, and we're just going to hit a couple empty tents and then be done with it and say, there, we showed you? Or does the president actually have a strategy to tip the balance in Syria? None of us have any clue.
But it's very clear, especially with the growing voices from some libertarian lawmakers, including the Rand Pauls of the world, that they don't believe that we have a role, period, outside of the domestic U.S. And some of the growing voices of libertarians coming out of the Republican Party say this isn't our fight. What do you say to those who say we have enough problems here, we shouldn't be going abroad and trying to change things going on in Syria? Forget about not being robust enough. They don't want to have any role whatsoever.
I'm always disappointed when senators and congressmen from the libertarian wing of the Republican Party try and mislead the American people. If we think that a bad economy, that unemployment, that all of these things are a problem, let me tell you, al-Qaeda getting a hold of chemical weapons, Hezbollah getting a hold of chemical weapons will bring a whole new meaning to the concept of horrible. And they owe it to the American people to explain why we don't have an interest in more stability in the Middle East.
Explain, the White House said today that if there's a no vote for an authorization of force, it just doesn't stop at Syria. They say it sends a direct message also to Iran and obviously their efforts to secure nuclear power and also to creating more extremists in Syria. Is that hyperbole, or do you think they're right?
It certainly sends a message to Iran, but let's remember where this started. The President of the United States made a decision to go into Libya without congressional authorization. The actions that we took there were far more than anything that's been proposed for Syria. Now, all of a sudden, it's Congress's fault if the United States loses its credibility with Iran. The President didn't need to go to Congress in the first place. The only reason he did was to share the blame if things went wrong.
But leadership of Congress of both parties said it was the right thing to ask for congressional authorization. It was the right thing to involve Congress on this. Certainly the legislative branch disagrees with you that they had a role here.
Okay, well, of course the legislative branch disagrees with me. The legislative branch is about protecting its own prerogatives. But the law of the land says, the War Powers Act says, that the president needs to go to Congress for authorization within 60 days of the start of hostilities, not as a prelude to ask for permission. The president, whether you like him or not, is in fact the commander-in-chief according to our Constitution.
So would you advise, regardless of how Congress votes here, whether the House and Senate both say no, he should still act anyway? We are where we are right now. Let's not go back in time. I'm saying going forward, if Congress doesn't give him the green light, should he go in anyway?
I think that it is something that we can't contemplate, the notion that Congress doesn't give the president the green light. I think that's going to be up to the president. Next week, they're briefing the full House on Monday. The president is going to address the nation on Tuesday. It's up to him to make a persuasive case to the American people and to the Congress that anything other than a yes vote here is not acceptable. So far, he hasn't done it. Let's see if he can.
But if he does, and they still vote no, should he still go ahead?
It's a very hard question, and I guess on balance I'd say the answer is no. If Congress explicitly says no, then I think he's boxed himself into an absolutely terrible position, not just for Barack Obama, but for every subsequent commander-in-chief in the United States.
Finally, Danielle, how much of this, I've heard so many lawmakers talk about the cost of war. They don't believe when a president says this won't be long drawn out or boots on the ground. I keep hearing about the hangover in Iraq, and a lot of lawmakers say, burn me once, shame on you. I'm not going to let this be on my watch the second time around. How much does the fog of Iraq carry over to the conversation of Syria?
Well, I think it does carry over, and clearly there's a lot of ill will, there's a lot of bad feeling. But of course, a lot of that bad feeling comes from the president's own party, and it comes from people like the president himself, who as senator and as president said that we were turning our back on the Middle East, that Iraq was behind us. Now he's been hoisted by his own petard, and he's going to have to make a credible sale to the American people who remember exactly what he told us. Iraq wasn't worth it. Oh, but this is. Tell us why.
Danielle Pletka, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.